Okay, I want to talk about more about ideology and ideological state apparatus. Okay. All right, let's get started. So this is lesson 2, more notes on ideology and ideological state apparatuses. And we're moving slow through this, but we're going to pick it up next week. I want you guys to finish up your essay 1 so that we can really get into this, because this is our new historicism, really. Okay, let's go forward. Okay. Uh-oh, I think I went too far. Okay, so what we're going to learn about, how is the reproduction of labor power ensured. So remember last time we understood that in a capitalist regime, okay, that in order to make a product, you have to also reproduce the means to make your product or for production. And part of that is making the people, your labor power, right? So we're going to talk about labor power. We're going to talk about diversified skill of labor power and what do children learn? Okay, so what do kids learn in school? Okay, all right. So this is all based on our reading here. Okay, and we still have a lot to go through, right? But we got to get this beginning part, right? So now, how is the reproduction of labor power ensured? Okay, so I've pulled out 3 quotations here. Okay, so the production of labor power, it takes place outside of work or outside of the firm, right? So making people takes place outside of the firm, okay? It's done in a ideological institution called the family, okay? So it takes place outside of business, all right? So it's ensured by giving labor power the material means, okay, with which to reproduce itself. So labor power reproduces itself outside of the factory or the firm or the corporation, okay? And what does it need to do that? It needs wages, okay? It needs wages, right? So wages are only a part, okay? Now listen, wages represent only that part of the value produced by the expenditure of labor power, which is indispensable for its reproduction. So wages represent only a part of what labor power needs to reproduce itself. Okay, so indispensable to the reconstitution of labor power, right, of the wage earner. Okay, so what does the labor power need? Okay, that is indispensable. It needs to be able to have housing, food, clothing, right, and to get back to work. Okay, so to pay for housing, food, and clothing, and in short, to enable the wage earner to present himself again at the factory gate the next day. So what that means is that the bourgeoisie, because remember, we learned about the proletariats and the bourgeoisie are called according to Althusser, right? And remember, this dude is French, right? So what do they want to give the proletariat, the worker, the wage owner, right? Just enough to pay for housing, food and clothing, and to present himself at the factory or herself at the factory again, okay? All right, because you gotta maintain the means of production. You gotta reproduce, right? The means of production so that you can keep producing. I wanna keep making laptops. Okay, let's keep going. Again, so now what else? What else is the wage, right? So the quantity of value, right, or of wages necessary for the reproduction of labor power is determined not by the needs of the biological guaranteed minimum wage, right, alone, but also by the historical minimum. So not by the biological, but also by the historical. And what does that mean, right? Okay. So the Englishman needs beer and the Frenchman needs wine. And what does the Californian need? Okay. They need wine and weed. Okay. All right. So it is defined not by the historical needs of the working class recognized by the capitalists, but by the historical needs imposed by the proletarian class struggle. What's that? Right? The lengthening of the day and the reduction of wages. That's what we have right now. Our days lengthen. We think we're staying at home, right? And we're working from home, but we're working more. I'm at my computer more, right? I'm working more. My day is lengthening, right? People want you to go to meetings on the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday, okay? I thought the work week was Monday through Friday, okay? And then you have how many hours you're supposed to work a day, okay? You get some time off. Well, that's becoming blurred now. That's becoming blurred. All right. So let's keep going. I don't want to bibble babble too much. So how do we get diversified skill of labor power in a capitalist regime, right? So it's not like slavery or serfdom, right, where you're forced to work, okay? Get to work. It's not like that, right? So how's that achieved, right? So diversified skill of labor is again achieved more and more outside of production. Okay, there used to be apprentices, like, oh, I'm a woodworker. This is my apprentice, and I'm teaching them the art of woodworking, right? What do we have? We have educational systems. Okay, so wait a minute. Okay, so we have the capitalist educational system, right? And by other instances and institutions. We're going to learn about more institutions in the ideological apparatus as we move forward, okay? But the educational institution, right? So what do children learn? So what do you learn outside of the corporation, right? How do you get that diversified labor? And remember, the bourgeoisie are trying to ensure that. Okay, so I need to reproduce my workers. So how am I going to do that? Right, I've got to also reproduce that mindset. Right, so it's the educational system. It's happening outside. Right, we're learning through Althusser that it's happening more and more outside of production in the educational system. Okay, so I said that a whole bunch of times. So all right, so what do children learn? They learn the know-how and they learn knowledge, okay? The know-how, the technique, how to do it. How do I make a lemonade? I'm gonna squeeze some lemon in here and put a little agave, some cold water, and I'm gonna put some ice, stir it up, put it in a cup, and hand it to the person that I'm selling lemonade to, okay? That's actually limeade. It's delicious. Okay. They also learn the rules of good behavior. Okay. They learn the attitude that should be observed by every agent in the division of labor according to the job that he's destined for. Okay, now I'm doing finger quotes, right? If you believe in destiny, okay? If you believe that your world is out of your control, okay? And we're going to read more. We're going to read about destiny later. Do you believe in fate? Okay. So you are destined for this type of job. I'm going to send you to school X, where where there's only like one teacher for every 100 kids. Okay. I'm going to send you to school X, and what are you going to learn? Okay. I want you to learn how to be worker X, right? That doesn't move too far past this spot. Okay, this is the spot. You're not moving too far past that, okay? Because I'm going to give you this amount of education because I need to ensure that I have a worker that's going to be able to stir my lemonade. Okay, so school. Okay, so they teach you the attitude that should be observed by the job that you're destined to have or supposedly destined to have. Okay, now, well, I'm not going to talk about. I was going to say I wasn't destined to be a teacher. No, I wanted to, but I never believed that I was that I could do it. Okay, so anyway, what else? And I'm a teacher in the educational system, right? Dig this, the educational system, right? That is trying to control your mind, your thoughts to be a certain kind of worker, right? But it's not done consciously because remember at the very beginning when we were reading this about the ideology that Althusser said that we know this without knowing that we know. So it's unconscious or subconscious. We know, right? So ultimately, what does a children learn? They learn the rules of the established order, right? And that is by class domination. Okay, so they learn the rules of the dominant culture. That's what they learn, of the established order, right? And how to maintain the status quo. Don't get out of line. Don't be that nail that sticks up. Boom, get pounded down, right? Okay. So labor power requires not only the reproduction of its skills, but also at the same time, a reproduction of the submission to the rules of the established order, right? So to get your labor power, okay, so you can keep making laptops, okay, I need, right, a worker, right, that is tame, that is submissive, right, to the established order. Okay. Look at this. This is like, I need to control your mind. Okay. I.e., right, a reproduction of the submission of the ruling ideology for the worker and a reproduction of the ability to manipulate the ruling ideology correctly for the agents of exploitation and repression. Okay. So you're being repressed so you can be exploited, right? Your exploitation keeps you repressed, and it is a cycle, and every agent in the cog is there to oppress, right? And exploit. All right. So they too will provide the domination of the ruling class, right? So the agents of the ruling class are going to provide the domination of the ruling class. What's an example of an agent of the ruling class? You can't F with the police. You can't F with the police. But we'll talk about that later because first we got to talk about infrastructure and superstructure, but we're not there yet. We're just talking about labor, right? How do you make stuff? How do you keep it going, the cog? Keep it turning, right? We're reading this, right? And how is this going to relate to what we're reading? Sonny's Blues, he talked about James Baldwin. Wait, let me find James Baldwin. He talks about, right, the repression, right? The attitude for the job that you're destined for, right? So let me see. Oh, here's Sonny's Blues, right? So this is James Baldwin, Sonny's Blues. And okay. And I'm on page 122. Your page nation might be different, right? And he talks about, James Baldwin talks about this, what the children learn. What do children learn, right? The attitude, right? That every agent should have, right? For the job he's destined for. And these rules are established by the dominant class, right? So it's about exploitation and repression, right? That needs to happen, right? And what is part of the exploitation? Getting people hooked on drugs, okay? So, or getting people drunk, okay? Look at okay, let me just stick with Sonny's Blues. All right, so now here is the narrator talking about the first time Sonny had heroin, and here they refer to it as horse. I was sure that the first time Sonny had ever had horse, he couldn't have been much older than these boys were now. Okay, I need to make a stop here. That Baldwin is having the narrator refer to the children that he teaches, right, in Harlem. Okay, so let me reread this, right? He could not have been much older than these boys were now. These boys now were living where we'd been living then. They were growing up with a rush and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibilities. They were filled with rage. All they really knew were two darknesses: the darkness of their lives, which was now closing in on them, and the darkness of the movies, which had blinded them to that other darkness, and in which they now vindictively dreamed at once more together than they were at any other time more alone, right? This is what he's talking about, right? Feeling isolated, right? Okay. Not only are you being repressed and exploited, but you're being isolated too. So then you have no system, no social system, right, to pull you out. Okay. Now look at this, the words that Baldwin uses. The darkness, right? What do you think he means by the darkness? We saw this again. We saw this in The Most Dangerous Game, this use of the darkness, right? What about the general? What did he think about people? He was racist. He was biased, right? What are they bumping up against, right? What are they learning, these children, that's making them so angry, right? They're learning about their repression and exploitation by the dominant class, right? That's what they're learning, okay? All right, so now we see how our texts are connecting, right? We're connecting our texts together and we're able to express it. All right, let's keep going. So what did children learn, right? So the school, but also, oh, I hate that, but these are quotations. These are quotations, so I have to do it word by word. You can tell I did not write this, okay? But also other state institutions, I should say like the church, right? The church is a state institution in France. In the United States, it is not. In the United States of America, this is a heavily Christian country, but there is no so-called church, right? We have a separation of church and state. In France, the state institutions, the church is a part of the state institutions, right? And what are other apparatuses, right? Like the army, right? That's a state institution, the army. I did mention the police. The police is a state institution, right? Okay. They're actually called repressive state institutions, right? Because they beat your ass when you step out of line. They repress you hard. Boom, come down with violence. Okay, that's what state institutions do. Okay, now let's keep going. Teaching know-how, but informs that ensure subjugation to the ruling ideology, right? So now you're learning know-how, but so that you are subjugated to the ruling ideology or the ruling thoughts, okay? So you become submissive to it. You guys ever seen that movie, They Live? And he was just like, oh, I have a headache. And he's walking along and he finds these sunglasses after this raid. He puts these sunglasses on and all of a sudden he sees all the ideology of repression. Reproduce, sleep, eat, okay? All right, so all the agents of production, exploitation, and repression, professionals of ideology, must be steeped in the ruling class ideology to perform their task. And what is their task? To exploit the proletarians for the bourgeoisie or the capitalists, okay? That's their job. And we see this, right? We're gonna talk more about Sonny's Blues, and Paul hates being a proletariat. He wished he was one of the bourgeoisies. That's part of his problem, right? The lottery, what is the lottery? That's a classic example of some stuff we're going to talk about in lesson 3, right? When we talk about first we got to talk about what's the difference between the infrastructure and the superstructure, and then we're going to talk about what's inside, okay? And that's where we're going to get to the ideological state apparatus, the ISA, and the repressive state apparatus, the RSA. And we have seen this in the COVID. We have seen this with COVID-19 in 2020. All right, let's keep going. Conclusion, next video, we're going to talk about infrastructure and superstructure. All right, so have a great week. Write up that, I shouldn't say that so I can use this video for later. Oh, well. Write your essay, draft 2, get it done. All right, guys, and get your reading done.